In every quiet suburban neighborhood, there's usually one thing that stands out: a landmark, a tradition, or a story everyone remembers. In the community of Maplewood Estates, that landmark was an enormous, majestic oak tree that had stood tall in one homeowner's front yard for over 50 years. Its sprawling branches provided shade, its leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and it was, for many residents, a symbol of the neighborhood's charm and tranquility. This tree wasn't just any tree, it was the tree, a giant oak that belonged to Mark Richardson, a man who had lived in the neighborhood for over 2 decades. Mark loved his tree. He had planted it as a sapling when his first child was born. Over the years, it grew into a natural fortress of green, the backdrop for family barbecues, lazy Sunday afternoons, and childhood memories. Neighbors admired it, often complimenting how it enhanced the curb appeal of his home and the entire block. But, as it often happens in suburban life, beauty and peace were about to be shattered not by a storm, but by a storm brewing inside the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. At the center of this brewing conflict was Linda Carmichael, the fiercely ambitious HOA president. Linda had been voted in just 6 months earlier, and from day one, she had made it clear she wanted to reshape the neighborhood to fit her idea of perfection. She loved strict rules and regulations, and she saw herself as the guardian of Maplewood's image. It was the summer of 2023 when the trouble started. Linda received a complaint about Mark's oak tree. The complaint, unsigned but clearly motivated, claimed the tree's branches extended too far over the sidewalk, causing potential safety hazards for pedestrians and damage to public property. The HOA's covenants had a clause about tree maintenance and safety, and Linda saw this as an opportunity to assert control. What Linda didn't expect was the strong reaction from Mark. When she sent the official notice demanding the removal or severe trimming of the oak tree, Mark was stunned. To him, the tree was not only a piece of nature but a part of his family's history. To remove or mutilate it would be unthinkable. Mark responded by attending the next HOA meeting, a routine gathering that suddenly turned tense. Neighbors took sides, some siding with Linda's rules or rules stance, others sympathizing with Mark's attachment to the tree. The meeting was heated but inconclusive. Linda promised to take all necessary steps to enforce the rules. Behind the scenes, Linda was already plotting. She hired a certified arborist who was known for harsh assessments and scheduled an inspection. The arborist's report was damning. The tree's branches did overhang the sidewalk by a few feet. The roots had caused minor cracks on the pavement, and it was a liability. With this report in hand, Linda issued a formal demand. The tree must be trimmed back severely, or Mark would face fines escalating each week of non-compliance. The HOA rules allowed fines of up to $100 per day, and Linda wasn't shy about using that power. Mark was furious. He hired his own arborist who submitted a report praising the tree's health and disputing claims about safety hazards. The neighborhood split deep, a half believing Linda was right to enforce rules for public safety, the other half rallying behind Mark to save the beloved oak. Social media buzzed. Maplewood Estates Facebook groups exploded with posts, memes, and videos of the tree, many calling it Maplewood's heart. The story went viral in local news outlets, sparking debates about HOA power, homeowners' rights, and what community really means. But the most surprising twist was yet to come. Mark, a quiet man known for his calm demeanor, started digging into the HOA's bylaws and legal documents. He discovered something remarkable, a loophole buried deep in the HOA's governing documents that gave homeowners certain protections over mature trees on their property, protections that Linda had either overlooked or deliberately ignored. Mark didn't just want to save his tree, he wanted to challenge the entire power structure of the HOA, starting with Linda herself. In the next few weeks, the battle escalated beyond simple letters and meetings. Mark began gathering evidence, consulting legal experts, and preparing a case that would shock the community. Linda, meanwhile, ramped up her efforts to enforce fines and even threatened to take Mark to court. As the tension mounted, the neighborhood was divided and the stakes grew higher, not just for Mark and Linda, but for the future of Maplewood Estates. The tree that once stood quietly in Mark's front yard was now the battleground of a neighborhood war, one that would expose secrets, test friendships, and ultimately change the balance of power in ways no one saw coming. After the stormy HOA meeting and the barrage of official notices demanding the removal or brutal trimming of the oak tree, Mark Richardson knew he was facing more than just a simple neighborhood dispute. What began as a complaint about a tree's branches had blossomed into a full-scale power struggle between one homeowner and the newly empowered HOA president, Linda Carmichael. Linda, confident in her position, believed she held all the cards. She had the HOA's covenants, the signed complaints, and a professional arborist's report backing her demands. The threat of daily fines loomed over Mark's head like a sword, and many neighbors expected him to fold under the pressure. But Mark wasn't about to let his beloved oak tree fall victim to what he saw as an abuse of HOA authority. Determined, Mark began a deep dive into the HOA's governing documents. He meticulously reviewed the original Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the legal Bible of Maplewood Estates. He spent hours sifting through pages of bylaws, amendments, and homeowner agreements. What he found was unexpected and, in his mind, game-changing. Buried deep in the HOA's documents was a clause overlooked by the board and the president that specifically protected mature trees on private property from removal or significant alteration without homeowner consent, except in cases of imminent danger. The clause also outlined that any attempt by the HOA to impose fines or mandates related to such trees required a formal review process, with a panel of independent arborists and community votes. This was a loophole so big that Linda's demand for Mark to remove or drastically trim the tree without following due process was, on its face, invalid. Not only that, the clause gave homeowners the right to challenge the HOA's decisions in civil court and recover legal fees if the HOA was found to have acted beyond its authority. Mark knew this was the leverage he needed, but it wasn't just a legal technicality, it was a reflection of a long-forgotten community value that had been buried under the years of increasingly strict HOA rule enforcement. The founders of Maplewood Estates had clearly intended to protect the neighborhood's natural beauty, recognizing mature trees as an integral part of the community's character. Armed with this knowledge, Mark reached out to a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and property law. The lawyer confirmed the loophole's validity and urged Mark to prepare for a formal challenge. Meanwhile, Mark began quietly rallying support from other homeowners who either shared his love for the neighborhood's natural elements or who had grown wary of Linda's authoritarian style. At the next HOA board meeting, Mark submitted a formal request demanding the immediate suspension of any fines or mandates related to his oak tree, citing the protection clause. He also requested the formation of an independent review panel as required by the HOA's own rules. Linda was blindsided. She hadn't anticipated Mark would come prepared with a well-researched legal argument. Her confident posture shifted subtly as the board members looked through the dense pages Mark provided. The room buzzed with murmurs from neighbors, some surprised, others excited by the prospect of challenging the president's heavy-handed approach. But Linda wasn't one to back down easily. She argued that the arborist's report proving safety hazards trumped any such clause, insisting that the rule was in place to protect the community's well-being. However, the governing documents were clear that no action could be taken without proper review and homeowner involvement. The tension was palpable. The HOA board found themselves in a legal bind: either follow their own rules or risk opening the door to a lawsuit that could drain their resources and embarrass the association publicly. Over the following days, the Maplewood Estates Facebook group exploded with posts analyzing the documents, debating HOA powers and praising Mark's knowledge and courage. Several homeowners began sharing stories of their own battles with overreach, creating a growing movement calling for transparency and fairness. Linda, feeling the pressure mounting, decided to shift tactics. Instead of continuing to push directly against Mark, she began focusing on swaying other homeowners through meetings, emails, and even private conversations. She painted Mark as a troublemaker undermining the neighborhood's safety and harmony, trying to rally support to reinstate her authority. However, the momentum was no longer fully in her hands. Mark's careful legal approach and community backing made it clear that this was not just about a tree anymore, it was a fight for the future balance of power. In Maplewood Estates, Mark then took a bold next step. He filed a formal complaint with the HOA's arbitration committee, triggering the review process. This forced Linda and the board to convene the independent panel of arborists, community members, and legal advisors as outlined in the governing documents. The panel's evaluation was thorough and impartial. Multiple arborists examined the oak tree, confirming it was healthy and did not pose an immediate danger. While some branches did extend over the sidewalk, they were not deemed hazardous enough to warrant removal or heavy trimming. The minor pavement cracks were found to be common wear and not definitively caused by the tree roots. When the panel presented its findings to the HOA board, Linda's argument was further weakened. The board voted to suspend any fines against Mark and ordered that no action be taken on the tree without unanimous homeowner approval. This was a significant defeat for Linda, a public setback that exposed her aggressive enforcement tactics as unjustified. More importantly, it shifted the power dynamic within the HOA. Homeowners, inspired by Mark's win, began demanding greater say in community decisions, transparency from the board, and fairer enforcement of rules. Linda's authority was slipping. Rumors began swirling about her possible removal from the HOA presidency at the upcoming elections. Yet, the fight was far from over. Linda still controlled many levels of power within the HOA and was known for her ruthless determination. If she wanted to maintain control, she would need to find a new strategy and fast. For Mark, the battle had revealed a truth he never expected. Standing up for what he loved required more than passion. It required knowledge, unity, and the courage to challenge a system built to protect the few, often at the expense of the many. As the neighborhood watched, the oak tree stood tall and moved by the petty power struggles around it, a silent symbol of resilience. What started as a simple complaint about an overhanging tree branch had now snowballed into a full-blown neighborhood controversy. The once quiet streets of Maplewood Estates buzzed with whispers and opinions, and the tension between Mark Richardson and Linda Carmichael, the HOA president, had reached a boiling point. Mark, undeterred by the barrage of official HOA letters and the looming threat of daily fines, knew he needed more than just a heartfelt plea to save his beloved oak tree. The tree was more than just foliage, it was family history, a piece of the neighborhood's soul, and Mark wasn't about to let it be taken down without a fight. Late into the night, Mark pored over the HOA's covenants and bylaws, a dense forest of legal jargon and fine print. Hours turned into days as he scrutinized every clause, determined to find anything that could protect his tree, and maybe, just maybe, push back against Linda's iron grip on the neighborhood. Then, buried deep within a long-forgotten amendment, Mark found it, a clause that essentially shielded mature trees on private property from removal or significant alteration without the explicit consent of the homeowner unless the tree posed an immediate danger. More importantly, it mandated that the HOA must follow a formal review process involving an independent panel of certified arborists and community members before enforcing any action related to such trees. This wasn't just a loophole, it was a built-in protection that Linda and the current board had conveniently overlooked, or worse, intentionally ignored. Armed with this discovery, Mark consulted a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. The attorney confirmed that the HOA president's demand to remove or drastically trim the oak without following the proper procedure was not only unreasonable, but could potentially expose the HOA to legal liability. Mark's quiet, steady resolve began to shift the narrative. He formally requested a halt to all fines and enforcement actions related to his oak tree, until the HOA complied with the proper review process. The next HOA meeting was electric. The room was packed, neighbors craning their necks to hear what would unfold. Mark presented the clause, the legal opinion, and his request. Murmurs spread quickly among attendees. Some were shocked, others excited. Finally, a glimmer of hope for homeowners weary of arbitrary rules. Linda's usual confidence faltered as board members flipped through the dense documents Mark provided. She insisted the safety concerns justified her actions and that the arborist's report she commissioned was all that mattered. But the HOA's own documents clearly required the formal review process, a process she had bypassed entirely. Faced with this undeniable proof, the the board hesitated. They were caught between enforcing Linda's directives and adhering to their own governing rules. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's social media pages exploded. Posts circulated Mark's findings, screenshots of HOA documents, and videos of the meeting. Maplewood Estates became the talk of the town, not for its manicured lawns or cookie-cutter homes, but for this David versus Goliath battle over a tree. Linda's supporters rallied on private groups, accusing Mark of stirring unnecessary drama and threatening the neighborhood's safety. But many residents, tired of what they saw as overreach and intimidation tactics, found themselves rallying behind Mark. Under mounting pressure, Linda reluctantly agreed to initiate the mandated review process. An independent panel was convened, including certified arborists, legal experts, and homeowner representatives. They were tasked with assessing the tree's health and safety concerns, while also ensuring the HOA's actions complied with the community's governing documents. The panel's evaluation was thorough and impartial. Arborists inspected the oak from root to branch, testing its stability and health. Their findings were clear. The tree was healthy, its branches sturdy, and the minor pavement cracks near its roots were not a direct result of the tree. The overhang was minimal and posed no imminent threat to pedestrians. Their recommendation was firm: the tree should be preserved, and no drastic trimming or removal was warranted. This outcome was a serious blow to Linda's authority. The HOA board, faced with the panel's report and the community's swelling support for Mark, voted unanimously to suspend all fines and enforcement actions against him. For the first time since Linda had taken office, cracks began to show in her carefully constructed reign. Her aggressive tactics, meant to impose order and control, were now the subject of criticism and doubt. Homeowners began demanding more transparency and fairness in the HOA's dealings. Mark's victory was more than just about one tree. It was a message to the entire community that the HOA's power was not absolute, that homeowners had rights and those rights could be defended. But Linda was not ready to concede. Behind closed doors, she plotted her next move, determined to reclaim her grip on power. The battle lines were drawn, and what started as a dispute over a tree was about to become a full-scale fight for control of Maplewood Estates. The neighborhood held its breath as the conflict deepened. Would Linda double down and risk further alienating the community? Or would Mark's legal savvy and growing support force a new era of homeowner empowerment? As the sun set behind the towering oak, its branches casting long shadows over the neighborhood, one thing was clear: the war for Maplewood's soul had only just begun. The oak tree still stood tall, its leaves whispering in the summer breeze as if it sensed the storm gathering beneath its branches. The battle between Mark Richardson and HOA President Linda Carmichael had shifted gears. What was once a dispute about branches and pavement cracks had now morphed into a war for control, influence, and reputation within Maplewood Estates. Linda, once confident and commanding, found herself on shaky ground. The independent panel's ruling against her actions was a public humiliation she wasn't ready to accept. Her strategy, which had started with official letters and threats of fines, had crumbled in the face of homeowner pushback and legal realities. But Linda was no ordinary HOA president. She was the embodiment of persistence, a figure who thrived on authority and control, and she wasn't about to surrender without a fight. Her next move was twofold. First, she intensified efforts behind the scenes to discredit Mark Richardson. Subtle whispers about his troublemaking and disruptive behavior began circulating in private HOA meetings and social media groups. Linda leveraged her network of loyal board members to spread doubts about Mark's intentions, painting him as someone who cared more about personal vendettas than community well-being. Second, Linda began exploiting other HOA rules and restrictions unrelated to the oak tree, looking for any violation on Mark's property that could justify penalties or legal action. The move was clear: to wear him down through relentless enforcement, hoping financial burdens or social pressure would force him to relent. Mark, however, was ready for this. His research had extended far beyond the oak tree clause. He uncovered a series of questionable governance practices within the HOA, including lack of transparency in meetings, procedural irregularities, and even possible conflicts of interest involving Linda and certain board members. Armed with this information, Mark began gathering evidence and statements from neighbors who shared their concerns privately. The tide was turning. More residents who had once been indifferent or silent started to see Linda's leadership as more of a liability than an asset. Social media, which had earlier amplified the tree dispute, now became a battleground for public opinion about the HOA itself. Posts exposing Linda's tactics went viral in local groups. Neighborhood newsletters featured letters urging reform. Calls for a special meeting to discuss HOA leadership grew louder. Faced with mounting pressure, Linda tried to tighten her grip by calling an emergency HOA meeting. She aimed to reassert her authority and push through harsher rules on tree maintenance and homeowner compliance, hoping to rally her supporters and intimidate dissenters. But this meeting did not go as planned. Mark attended with a coalition of homeowners ready to hold Linda accountable. They presented their documented concerns about governance, procedural lapses, and unfair enforcement. Legal advisors were consulted, and a growing group demanded reforms, greater transparency, fairer enforcement processes, and limits on the president's unilateral powers. The atmosphere was charged. Some board members began questioning Linda's approach and expressed discomfort with the increasingly toxic environment. The once tight-knit HOA was fracturing, divided between supporters of Linda's authoritarian style and advocates of homeowner rights. Linda's desperation became palpable. In a last-ditch effort, she attempted to use the HOA's disciplinary committee to sanction Mark and his allies. But this backfired spectacularly when the committee, bound by the same covenants and oversight as the board, refused to proceed without proper cause and due process. Meanwhile, Mark pushed forward with a formal petition to hold a recall election for the HOA president and several board members. The petition quickly garnered signatures from a majority of homeowners, signaling a clear desire for change. The community that had once been divided by a single tree was now united in demanding accountability and fair governance. Linda's image suffered a severe blow. No longer the untouchable president, she was now seen as a figure clinging to power through questionable means, alienating neighbors and undermining community trust. Amid the turmoil, the oak tree remained a symbol of resilience and hope, standing quietly in Mark's yard, a silent witness to the upheaval. The battle lines had shifted dramatically. The homeowner who had once been threatened with fines over his tree was now leading a movement that threatened to uproot the very leadership trying to control him. The next chapter of this saga promised to be even more dramatic. Linda's desperate attempts to cling to power would clash with the community's push for justice, setting the stage for a showdown that could redefine the future of Maplewood Estates. The tension that had been simmering beneath the manicured lawns and freshly painted mailboxes of Maplewood Estates had finally reached a boiling point. The once peaceful subdivision was now the epicenter of a fierce battle for control, and the looming HOA election promised to be the ultimate test of power. Linda Carmichael, the embattled HOA president, had spent months trying to reassert her authority. Her aggressive tactics to intimidate Mark Richardson and silence his growing coalition had backfired spectacularly, exposing cracks in her leadership and galvanizing the neighborhood against her. The petition for a recall election had swept through Maplewood like wildfire, signaling a dramatic shift in community sentiment. Mark, once just a quiet homeowner fighting to save his oak tree, had become the unlikely champion for homeowners' rights. His careful legal research, unwavering commitment to transparency, and ability to unite neighbors had turned the tide. Now, the fate of the entire HOA and Linda's presidency rested on the upcoming election. In the weeks leading up to the vote, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Campaign flyers circulated, yard signs sprouted like wildflowers, and community meetings filled the local recreation hall to capacity. Conversations that once centered on landscaping and pool rules now revolved around governance reforms, fair enforcement, and rebuilding trust. Mark and his allies ran on a platform of transparency, homeowner empowerment, and respect for the community's history and natural beauty, including the cherished oak tree. Linda, on the other hand, doubled down on her message of order and safety, urging residents to back her to maintain stability. The election day arrived with an air of anticipation that felt more like a political showdown than a neighborhood vote. Ballots were cast, tallied and anxiously awaited. When the results were announced, the reaction was electric. Linda Carmichael was ousted from her position as HOA president, replaced by a new board comprised mostly of homeowners aligned with Mark's vision. The recall extended to several board members known for their unwavering loyalty to Linda. It was a dramatic and historic moment for Maplewood Estates, an extraordinary shift that no one had anticipated when the dispute over a single tree first began. But the fallout went beyond the election itself. Linda's departure sent ripples through the neighborhood's social fabric. For some, it was a long overdue reckoning, a victory for fairness and community spirit. For others, it was a loss of the strong leadership they believed had kept order. In the weeks following the election, the new board moved quickly to implement reforms. Transparency measures were introduced. Meeting agendas and minutes were posted online. Homeowners were invited to participate in committees, and enforcement processes were overhauled to ensure fairness and due process. Mark took a leadership role in the community, guiding efforts to heal divisions and foster collaboration. The oak tree, once the flashpoint of conflict, became a symbol of resilience and unity. Plans were made to celebrate its legacy with a neighborhood gathering, turning a source of strife into a shared point of pride. As Linda packed up her belongings and left the HOA office, the humbling defeat weighed heavily. Her attempts to wield power through intimidation and selective enforcement had been undone by the very community she claimed to serve. The once feared HOA president was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. The story of Mark S. Oaktree and the fight to protect it had become a defining chapter in Maplewood Estates' history. It was a reminder that homeowners, when united and informed, could challenge entrenched power structures and reclaim their neighborhood. Yet, even in victory, Mark knew the work was not over. The scars left by months of conflict ran deep. Rebuilding trust, ensuring ongoing fairness, and protecting the community's values would require vigilance and commitment. But for the moment, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The tree remained standing, its branches stretching wide over the street, a testament to endurance and the power of standing up for what matters. The winds of change had swept through Maplewood Estates, leaving behind a neighborhood forever altered by its fierce battle over a single oak tree. With Linda Carmichael ousted and a new board in place, the community faced the daunting task of healing deep wounds and rebuilding trust that had been shattered by months of conflict, accusations, and divided loyalties. Mark Richardson, now a respected leader within the HOA, understood that winning the election was only the beginning. The months of turmoil had left many neighbors wary, some still nursing resentment, others skeptical about whether change would truly bring fairness. The neighborhood, once unified by shared lawns and block parties, had become fragmented by fear and suspicion. The new board recognized the urgency of transparency and inclusivity. They began by opening all meetings to homeowners, posting agendas and minutes promptly online, and creating channels for open dialogue. For years, the board had operated with limited homeowner input, but now every voice mattered. Committees were formed to address key issues: maintenance, safety, landscaping, and governance reforms, ensuring that decisions reflected the community's collective will rather than the whims of a few. Mark spearheaded efforts to repair damaged relationships. He personally reached out to neighbors across the spectrum, listening to grievances and encouraging participation. He knew that restoring harmony required patience and genuine understanding. The oak tree, once the spark of discord, became a rallying symbol for the community's resilience and commitment to a shared future. Meanwhile, the new board tackled the thorny issues that Linda's leadership had left behind. They reviewed enforcement policies to ensure fairness and prevent misuse of power. Rules regarding tree maintenance were clarified, respecting homeowners' rights while balancing safety concerns. They also addressed procedural gaps that had allowed for the earlier overreach, establishing checks and balances to prevent a repeat of such abuses. The neighborhood's social media pages shifted tone from heated debates and divisive rhetoric to supportive posts about neighborhood improvements and upcoming community events. The story of Mark's oak tree became one of triumph, not just for one homeowner, but for the entire neighborhood reclaiming its voice. However, not all wounds healed overnight. Some neighbors remained skeptical, unwilling to fully trust the new board or forget the turmoil. The scars left by Linda's tenure served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of vigilance. Despite the challenges, progress was palpable. The HOA office adopted a new ethos centered on transparency, fairness, and community engagement. Residents volunteered for committees and neighborhood watch programs, rekindling the sense of togetherness that had once defined Maplewood Estates. Mark's role expanded beyond just the tree battle. He became an advocate for balanced governance, encouraging other neighborhoods to learn from Maplewood's experience. His clever legal maneuver had not only saved an oak tree, but had sparked a movement toward homeowner empowerment and accountability. The legacy of the oak tree grew stronger. Plans for an annual neighborhood festival celebrating community and nature were set in motion, ensuring the tree's place in Maplewood's heart for generations. The tree that nearly caused a neighborhood to split had instead become a beacon of unity. Linda Carmichael's defeat remained a stark reminder of how power, when wielded without transparency and respect, could crumble. Her attempts to silence dissent and control the narrative had only strengthened the very movement she sought to suppress. The humiliation she faced became a lesson in humility and the limits of authoritarianism. Within community leadership, as summer turned for fall, Maplewood Estates looked forward with cautious optimism. The wounds of conflict would take time to fade completely, but the foundation for a healthier, more inclusive HOA was firmly laid. The story of the oak tree and the homeowner who stood up against the president's overreach was told and retold, a viral narrative of resilience, clever legal insight, and the power of community. Maplewood Estates had been forever changed by the battle over one tree, a mighty oak, whose branches stretched wide, sheltering more than just a homeowner's yard. It had become a symbol of resistance, resilience, and a community's right to stand up against overreach. In the months following Linda Carmichael's fall from grace and the sweeping reforms within the HOA, the neighborhood entered a new chapter, one defined by transparency, fairness, and a renewed sense of ownership by its residents. But this wasn't just about governance, it was about legacy. Mark Richardson's victory had sparked conversations far beyond his own street. Other neighborhoods, hearing the story of the oak tree and the homeowner who used a cleverly hidden clause to protect it, began to re-examine their own HOA rules. His case became a reference point for HOA legal battles now, iron-wide, demonstrating how knowledge and unity could prevent abuse of power. Locally, the new board worked diligently to institutionalize the changes. Term limits for HOA officers were implemented to prevent the concentration of power. A mandatory homeowner advisory council was established to ensure voices were heard before decisions were made. Most importantly, the protections for mature trees and other natural elements were enshrined in clear, enforceable rules ensuring that no HOA president could unilaterally destroy what made the neighborhood special. Mark himself remained humble, often seen walking under the oak's spreading branches, reflecting on how a single tree had become the fulcrum of so much change. His fight had been about more than just preserving a tree, it was about safeguarding the principle that no one should wield unchecked power over a community. The oak tree's annual celebration became a cherished event, bringing neighbors together to appreciate nature, friendship, and shared history. Children played under its shade, elders told stories of the battle that united them, and newcomers learned what it meant to be part of Maplewood Estates. Linda Carmichael's name faded into local legend not as a tyrant, but as a cautionary figure whose ambition was undone by a community that refused to be silenced. Her downfall served as a powerful reminder that leadership comes with responsibility, respect, and accountability. The legal loophole Mark discovered, once buried in fine print, now stood as a beacon of homeowner empowerment. It reminded everyone that the rules governing neighborhoods were not just lines on paper, they were safeguards designed to protect people and places alike. In the end, the story was not just about a tree or a battle, it was about how ordinary people, armed with knowledge, courage, and unity, can challenge entrenched power structures and bring about real, lasting change. Maplewood Estates thrived not because of one person or one tree, but because of the collective spirit of its community. The oak stood tall, its leaves whispering lessons of resilience and justice to every breeze that passed through its branches,